This is the first time the Hillman Prize for Magazine Journalism has been awarded to work that appeared exclusively online. This is one small sign of how the invention of a huge global nervous system of instantaneous and almost costless communication and publication has changed everything and scrambled everything, right down to the traditional categories of journalism prizes. Well, against this background, Slate is worth celebrating because it has done so much to bring the best of what journalism has always been into the new universe of pixels traveling at the speed of light. Now, Tim Noah joined Slate in 1998, and as the writer of the Chatterbox column, he proved he could do short and snarky with the best of them. The column he writes now, The Customer, shows he can do consumer service too. But his coverage of the healthcare reform fight rivaled anything in the daily papers. Timothy Noah's The Great Divergence is an extraordinary 10-part series on a deeply disturbing phenomenon, the huge and relentlessly growing inequalities of wealth and income in the United States. There's a startling chart in Tim's first installment. It shows the share of personal income, exclusive of government transfers, claimed by the richest 10% over time. For almost 40 years after the Second World War, it holds steady at about 1/3. But beginning in 1980, the year Tim Noah became a journalist, though I'm not suggesting a causal relationship, it goes up and up and up and up for 3 decades until it breaks through the 50% mark, worse than just before the crash of 1929. Politicians don't talk a lot about income equality. Some Democrats talk about it, but a lot don't. Maybe because they're scared of being accused of class warfare, or maybe because they're worried about alienating well-heeled campaign contributors. Republicans hate to talk about it because their policies, as Tim shows, have been a major factor in driving it, and the policies they advocate for the future will make it worse. The media don't talk about it much either. It's too gradual. It's not breaking news. Tim's series is an intellectual and investigative inquiry into the scope and origins of the new inequality. He sets out with an open mind and a genuine curiosity. He takes the reader with him as he explores the various possible causes and introduces us to the scholars and researchers who've blazed the trail. It won't surprise this audience to hear that he concluded that one of the biggest factors, bigger than immigration, bigger than technology, bigger even than trade, has been the decline in the power of the labor movement. A decline, as he also finds, that has been due largely to government policies. The Great Divergence is an important, exemplary, and finally passionate work of long-form journalism. Please join me in welcoming its author as I present the 2011 Hillman Prize for Magazine Journalism to Timothy Noah of Slate.
Thank you, Rick, for that generous introduction. And thank you for your forbearance 30 years ago when you were the editor of the New Republic and I was your young and, it seems to me now, pretty clueless employee. Thanks to the Hillman Foundation for this wonderful prize and this wonderful ceremony. The Great Divergence is a trend toward growing income inequality in the US that began actually 1979, so I can't be blamed for it. I was still in college. It continues to this day. It has been a story for my entire working life. And I wrote this series because for decades I'd been hearing utterly contradictory explanations as to what had caused it. There was a very sophisticated argument that said once productivity increases resumed their post-war rate, it would stop, and that was wrong. Productivity increases now outpace the post-war years, yet working-class incomes did not rise in tandem as predicted. There was also a very crude argument made by political activists and people who really hadn't done their homework that said it was all Ronald Reagan's fault. And that was scorned by economists who are congenitally reluctant to admit that anything the government does has any effect at all. But what do you know? The blame Reagan theory turns out to be more right than wrong. Not news to this audience, I know. What troubled me most when I began reporting the series was that intelligent people were beginning to believe that growing income inequality was the inevitable byproduct of a capitalist economy. But it wasn't that byproduct for most of the 20th century. Now, the 20th century gets a bad rap, and for a lot of good reasons. 2 world wars, a worldwide economic depression, communism, fascism, nuclear weapons, the Holocaust, et cetera, et cetera. As Isabel shows in her book, it was a century that took its sweet time abolishing Jim Crow, and life was pretty lousy in various ways for women, homosexuals, and other groups. But the 20th century got the income distribution trend mostly right, as Rick pointed out. Incomes became less equal in the teens and 20s, but starting in the 1930s, incomes became more equal and continued to become more equal, or at least not become less equal, for most of the 1970s. When you read about it now, it sounds like an alternative universe. In 1945, do you know what the president of the Chamber of Commerce said? He said, and I quote, "Labor unions are woven into our economic pattern of American life, and collective bargaining is part of the democratic process." That was the president of the Chamber of Commerce. Did he mean it? I seriously doubt it. But he said it, and he said it because you had to say it in those days. Today, you don't have to say it. Here's what the Chamber said in 2008. Unions are not the answer to increasing prosperity for American workers or the economy. This was not a news story when they said that. Nobody was surprised. Today, the U.S. leads the OECD countries in income inequality, and it lags all OECD countries but Italy in upward mobility. As income inequality grows, America is becoming, there's no other way to put it, a more backward nation. By describing how this happened, I hope to make people recognize that the 20th century's greatest legacy is being betrayed. We can't figure out how to fix it until we understand how and why the Great Divergence came into being. Thank you.